I got an email yesterday about a sophomore in high school who tore her ACL last weekend. It's a player that I've watched play. I don't know her personally, and I don't know all the details of her uh, experience, practice habits, etc. But I do know that the NCAA now for girls basketball has two exposure weekends where Division One coaches can watch players play during April. In California, the high school championships are mid to late March. So that means a player who played for one of the best teams in Southern California or Northern California plays almost till the end of March in their high school season, and within 2 to 3 weeks is already playing in the arguably the most important exposure tournaments for their college recruiting. That means that there's no opportunity to take a break. You know, if as much as we want players to take a break after the season, there's no way that you're going to convince a player, a coach, or a parent that after a high school season, taking 2 to 3 weeks off and then going and playing in a exposure tournament without having practiced in 2 to 3 weeks is the best use of their time. So I think that having this recruiting period in April does a disservice to the high school players because it makes it very hard to convince players, coaches, and parents to take a break. Now, if the recruiting period was in, let's say, late May or June, it's very likely that many of these same players would be playing in other tournaments during the spring, and still would not take a break, still wouldn't rest. But then it'd be more on the players. It'd be the players' decision, the coach's decision, the parents' decision, that we're just going to ignore all advice in terms of rest, fatigue, recuperation, etc. after a long season, and we're just going to play through it. And then to me, it'd be if a player gets hurt, it's entirely up to the player's decision. But when the system is set up that these are very important weekends for a high school player, it's hard to tell them, nope, take 2 weeks off and then just go play the tournament without having practice. It's not something that's going to happen. It's not realistic. And so it puts pressure on the player to continue that competitive season another 3 to 4 to 5 weeks without any rest. And also, I saw a study this week, when players are more stressed, they tend to get injured more and especially hurt. Tear an ACL would be a severe injury. So you add on to the lack of rest and you're going into these tournaments with fatigue, and now there's the stress that the players feel that they have to perform in order to earn their scholarship. And you're also getting to the stressful time of year in terms of being a student, coming in on finals. This is the time of the year that, juniors are taking SATs, oftentimes for the first time. Maybe even some sophomores are taking their PSATs or SATs. So it's a stressful time of the year. You add that on top of the lack of rest after the season. So you have fatigue from the long high school season, no break, and you go straight into these exposure tournaments, which add more stress. And as I heard from one coach, there were multiple ACL tears at one of the exposure tournaments last weekend. I don't know if that's true or not. I wasn't there, but that's what I heard from a coach. And so again, I think that we've created a system that does a disservice to the athletes. And if we really want, the athletes to take their health and their training seriously, and we want them to follow what sports science continually tells us is the best method of training throughout a year, I think we can't create a system that makes it hard for them. We need to create the system that makes it as easy as possible for these players to follow the best possible advice. And then if the players decide not to follow the advice, then it's on them. But as long as we have a system where it makes it very hard to follow the best advice or the best practices, in terms of maintaining a player's health or preventing injuries or reducing injuries, I think the system is at fault. And it's not just on the players, it's not just on the coaches, it's not just on the parents, but it's the system that's creating this environment that tends to exacerbate the potential for injuries. And I think we're really hurting girls and women's basketball when we put these players at risk. We know they're already at risk. That girls tear their ACLs at a much larger percentage than boys. We know that basketball is a sport where there is a higher percentage of ACL injuries than almost any sport, probably except for girls soccer. And we know that fatigue tends to be associated with ACL injuries. We know that stress can cause injuries. All these things that we know, but then we're not doing anything about them. And we're on one side, we're saying, oh, players need to rest. And you see, experts on the internet and college coaches, the players play too many games and they need to rest more after the season. But then you have the system that's set up to help those college coaches recruit, and it's almost demanding that these players play games. So I think right now we're talking out of one side of our mouth, but then our actions are saying another. And if we really want, the advice that we're giving these young athletes, if we want them to take the advice and use the advice, we need to create a system that allows them to use the advice or encourages them to use the advice. And to me, that means we should move back these exposure tournaments that are in April and either push them all the way to the summer and just let recruiting go in the summer, or maybe in late May or June, although then you run into things like finals and so forth, graduations, and so that becomes problematic, I know, as well. But I think we need to experiment with different things and try to find different approaches, because the injury rates continue to go up despite our knowledge of and better training towards reducing injuries. And one of the reasons, in my opinion, that the injuries have maintained or increased is because the system isn't set up to help these players make the right decisions. And instead, we lengthen the competitive season, and lengthen especially the most stressful time of the competitive season, the playoffs, followed up right on the back with an important exposure weekend in the middle of finals or midterms, SATs, and it just creates a very stressful environment, a fatigued environment, and it's just ripe for players to hurt themselves. And as was seen this past weekend, it happens every single year.